Yeah, well, let's dig in. Hello, everybody. I'm David Cooks, and I tell you what, we know that paralysis can take on many forms. It can be physical like mine, or it can be psychological. Anything you put your mind to. And what we try to do is feature stories that go from difficult places to fulfilling purpose. What seems impossible. I've known this guy when he was 15 years old or so. I mean, he's a man now. I'm currently a sports talk radio host and TV analyst. It may knock you down, but don't let it stop you. He comes from a family that has always been involved in sports, a great competitor. His story is amazing. And, none of our journeys from paralysis to purpose are linear.
I'll never forget sitting down to watch the evening news, turning it on, and I was the lead story. 1280 The Zone afternoon drive host, Spence Checketts, arrested for DUI. It's a good life that I had built. And in one moment, I gave it all up. After that, I entered inpatient rehabilitation. I did 65 days. And when I got out, I felt amazing physically. I learned some skills in there, namely meditation, trauma healing. I turned 40 in rehab. And I just said, if you don't get a grip on this, the next downfall is going to be a lot worse than losing a job or a relationship or the respect of people. And I just realized I had to find another way. And got so much to give, a lot of life to live. You must go from paralysis to purpose. Get your pen and paper out. Yeah, I'm taking notes. Paralysis to purpose. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. I'm your host, David Cooks, and I love what I do because I get to speak with some of the most intriguing and inspiring people on the planet. And today is no exception. But before I get to who our guest is, let me thank you for listening and being a supporter of the podcast. Please take a moment to like this podcast, share this podcast, leave some comments, and also I need some reviews if you like what we do, because this podcast, if you're listening, will change your life. So that being said, I tell you what, I've known this guy. I mean, he's a man now. I've known him when he was 15 years old or so when I first met him. He is currently a sports talk radio host and TV analyst. He worked for ESPN 700 out in the great state of Utah. And he comes from a family that has always been involved in sports, the amateur level, all the way up to the professional level, and basketball and hockey, and a great competitor. His story is amazing. He's a father. He's a husband. And none of our journeys from paralysis to purpose are linear. And for all of us, paralysis can take on so many different forms. And I always define that as anything that keeps you from operating at your maximum. It hinders you from being the best version of yourself. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what was it that was a form of paralysis for our guest today, Spencer Checketts. So, Spencer, I'd like to welcome you to Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. Coach Cooks, Dave, thank you. I apologize it's taken so long to make this happen, but I'm thrilled to be here. I'm glad you're doing this and excited to spend some time with you today. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, you know what? I think it's a return favor too, because you've had me on your show a few times, and we always seem to talk right around 9/11 because we both lost a very important person in our lives on 9/11, and as Tyler Uglin. And so we always get a chance to connect. But I wasn't, before we start recording, I told you, I wasn't even aware of your story or even some of the struggles you had. I had no idea and have known you all these years. And so I'm excited for you to talk about that today. But before we do that, athletics has always been a very important part of you and your family. Can you talk about that and when you first started to get involved in sports and what that has meant for you?
Yeah, I don't have, and I talk about this on air quite a bit because I don't have a memory of life that doesn't involve the NBA. My father was the youngest, and I think still is, the youngest chief executive in professional sports. At the age of 28, he was made the president and general manager of the Utah Jazz. But before that, he was working for a Bain & Company in Boston, and we lived in Belmont, Massachusetts, and we used to go to Celtic games because my father knew Danny Ainge, still does. And so we were church friends, ward friends, neighborhood friends, and so we would go watch Danny play. And my earliest memories of life were at the Garden, watching those Celtic teams in the early 80s. And then we moved to Salt Lake when my father took the job with the Jazz, and
I always gravitated towards basketball specifically, but really any sport. Now it's golf because I get a little bit older and, body doesn't do what it used to do. And so I've always just enjoyed playing every sport I possibly could. I've always enjoyed competing, as you know, as someone who coached me and coached against me. I was a little bit fiery in my approach, but honestly,
a little bit fiery. I would say that's you're a wordsmith. That's what you are.
Fair enough. I've tried to calm in my older age, but I've always just enjoyed competing. I still do. And I, my whole life was involved in the NBA. After the Jazz situation, my father took the job with NBA International, worked for David Stern. And a year later, he was hired by Paramount Company to be the president, general manager of the New York Knicks, and then elevated to CEO of Madison Square Garden about 3 years after that, where he spent 10 great years. And that's when I played for you, when I was playing for New Canaan High School, and I played for your AAU team for a couple of summers. And then I, made the transition over to media shortly after I finished school. And I've been in sports talk radio and television it'll be 19 years coming up this fall. So it's really been everything that I know. I coached my son in his junior Jazz teams, and I still love it. I watched every minute of the finals last night, and it's still a huge part of what I do day to day.
Wow. Yeah. I was going to think about when it was that we met. And you're right. At that time, your dad was with Madison Square Garden, and you were a sophomore at New Canaan High School in Connecticut. Mm-hmm. And you played on our AAU team. We had an AAU program for our listeners called the Stanford Express. Yeah. And our goal was to take many of the people that were overlooked and give them an opportunity to compete at a national level, and for those who wanted to go on and play in college to do so. And Spencer was one of our early guys, and he was a fiery guard that did not see a shot that he did not like. Now, he will remind you that during the regular season, when he would compete against the school that I coached at Ariane, he would make sure he had a really good game. We don't have to talk about those right now.
No, we're very motivating. We could talk about when I dropped 19 in your gym to beat you guys. And I think the only 2 times I played against you, we were able to get the best of you. But it wasn't because of the coaching. I think it's fair to say Darien and New Canaan, we were limited athletically when it came to our approach to playing basketball. So I think one year was like, 51-47, we beat you. It was not aesthetically pleasing, but I was always motivated when we played against you, for sure. But I loved playing for you. It was a great experience.
That's so funny. I was in a meeting this morning and I actually thought about you because the summer of your AAU experience, you came here to Milwaukee. I brought the team here, and I remember we played some basketball and went to my folks' house and had a barbecue, and Summerfest was going on. And I believe Pearl Jam was the main what do you call it? The opening act or whatever, the main act at Summerfest. And I introduced you guys to some frozen custard and bratwurst and other things. And because it's more than just about basketball. It's more than just about the sport. And it's about building bonds and relationships and learning lessons along the way. So that's fantastic.
And if I could just, Coach,
go ahead.
Interject one quick story that I always think about to this day. There was one trip where we went to Boston, and I think we had a group of about, 15 or 16 players to choose from, depending on who was available. And there was one trip where we went up to Boston, and the only white kids were me and Pete Van Siclen. Remember Pete from Staples?
Van Siclen, yes.
Yeah, and I had obviously exposure to diverse situations because of my father's career in the NBA. And I went to 5-star basketball camp for 3 summers, but that was a really cool experience for Pete and I to know what it was like to be on the other end, right? Not to be part of the majority, but be part of the minority. And you did such a great job of bridging the gap. And it's like it wasn't even a thing at all. But I think about that experience to this day, where we had really a weekend trip, driving to Boston, eating together, playing basketball together, and there was 12 or 13 Black players, and then me and Van Siclen as the 2 white kids, and we were accepted, and it wasn't even like a thing. But to have that experience as a 16 or a 17-year-old really has served me well throughout the course of my life, and I have to give you a lot of credit for the way you helped us traverse those things.
Well, so interesting. We were very intentional with our efforts to provide as diverse an experience as possible.
Yeah.
Never knowing, like you say, what the makeup of the team was going to be when we hit the road.
Yeah.
But we always wanted to make sure that we respected the human dignity of every person in our program.
Yeah.
And that became, when you talk about building culture, that was the culture of our program, is that everybody respects everyone. We're all on the same plane here, and we are all horizontally accountable to each other.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, that goes a long way, and that's something that I know you're committed to today, and I continue to be committed to as well. Hey, you talked a little bit about church for a moment, and I want you to talk a little bit about the importance of faith to you and your family. I didn't know a lot of things about you when I met you, and I don't assume anything, but I know that you're part of the Mormon faith and the Mormon church. Can you talk a little bit about how important that was for you as a young person? And then I'm going to want to come back to that as we get into some of your struggles as well.
Yeah, the interesting thing, Dave, Coach, is that
you don't know what to call me, do you?
You're Coach Cooks to me. You
can call me Coach Cooks then.
Coach Cooks it is, because I still have my Stanford Express jersey. Believe that or not, I still have the jersey downstairs in storage. I actually am
That's 25 years ago.
I know, but I've kept it intentionally because I love those summer experiences so much. I personally am not a part of the LDS culture and faith currently, and haven't been since I was an adult. And that's probably a different story for a different time. But growing up, and my father, who has accomplished a ton in life and is a great man, as much as he is as a great businessman and leader, he's a great husband, great father. We have a great relationship to this day. He is very much a man of faith. And that was kind of instilled upon us when we were children. I'm the oldest of 6. It was all about family. It was all about service. It was all about community. And because of those, I'll call them cornerstones, I've been able to maintain faith of my own in a different way, albeit in a different community. Right. I don't know if this is the place to speak about my disagreements with the LDS culture. I don't think we need to go there.
No, we can do that on another podcast. Sure, because what? Because there is a place for that. There's a place for conversation and understanding. And I think that sometimes we try to run away from this conversation in this day and age because people think that you're throwing stones and trying to break things up. And that's not necessarily, disagreement does not mean destruction.
Sure. No, that's well said. And ultimately my challenge was when I decided that Mormonism was not for me, to maintain my spirituality. And honestly, I lost it for a while. And I think that's one of the reasons why I kind of lost my way. But I've been able to find my own path, utilizing my own faith, and to stay grounded and be a husband and be a father and be a committed worker, and a part of the community that puts things back into the river of life and does the best I can to help others, But when you go from a faith that is as intricately involved as Mormonism, and you decide that that's not for you anymore, it's a challenge to find what is for you, And I think being able to go back to my roots and, utilize the foundation of my father's faith, my mother's faith, my family's faith in my own way has really allowed me to find a path in life where I see a lot of open highway in front of me, and feel grounded and feel good about it. But it was a challenge for a while. I was in the woods going, what's next, and tried a lot of things, developed some pretty unhealthy habits, and I'm fortunate to have come out on the other side in a pretty good place.
Wow. And you know what? And again, we're just having a conversation. So for our listeners, I didn't know we were going to go down this path at all. But this is part of having a conversation and part of learning about other people. Because I know that you talked about having a values-based foundation.
Yeah.
And that's what I think your family, knowing your dad and your mom, who I have so much respect for,
they're the best.
Instilled in you. And that allowed for you to at least land on something that would be firm.
Yes.
And for those who don't understand how difficult it is a lot of times for children to establish their own faith that may be a little different than their family or the history of their family. That's not an easy thing to endure,
Right.
or an easy decision to make. So kudos to you for being willing to do that and to embrace faith as a part of your journey.
No,
Now,
I appreciate that.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about developing bad habits and some of the stumbles that you had.
Yeah.
My purpose really with this podcast is to encourage people and to have them hear great stories of people who are dealing with real life issues that they've overcome and that they may continue to fight. And yours is one that I think is amazing. I did not know that you struggled with a substance abuse thing. When I coached you, I didn't have that type of interaction with you on a regular basis. So I wasn't able to really detect anything because when you were with me and the guys, it was about basketball.
Yeah.
And it was about hooping. And it was about winning these games. And so what caught my eye was in March of 2018, is when I saw something online that you stepped away from your job and because of a DUI. And I was like, oh my God, and to step away, it kind of caught my eye. Like, I wonder how he's doing. I wonder what's that about. So let's go back to just kind of the process of beginning that journey, not knowing that you were going to have an issue. And then most importantly, what were the keys that helped you to become a person of sobriety and make the commitment to stay so?
Yeah, I'll take you back a little bit further than 2018, all the way back actually to 2003. I just celebrated my 19-year cancer-free anniversary.
You had a brain tumor. When was that? When was that?
It was June 6, 2003.
Okay. So that would have been approximately 8 or 9 years after you had played for me.
Yeah, ish. Yeah, thereabouts. Yeah.
About there. Okay. So here we go. I wasn't aware that you had a brain tumor. Yeah. So you had a brain tumor and continue now, because I just had to stop because I didn't know.
Yeah. So it was, I was 25 years old. I was a young husband and father. I was married and my son he would have been just shy of 2 years old. And I had been at school at the University of Utah. I was a walk-on for Rick Majerus for a little while. I always joke that Andre Miller retired me from basketball because when I tried to guard Andre, I said, all right, maybe radio and TV is better for me because I'm not on that level. And so stayed in Salt Lake, met a girl, got married. We actually moved back to New York, where I took a job with a record label for about 1.5 years. I wanted to try music. It was kind of interesting to me. She didn't like it back there. And so she wanted to come back to Salt Lake. Very long story short, I ended up coming back here and I was on a flight. I came out here. My grandfather was getting an award for Father of the Year. And I was on a plane and I noticed some weakness on the left side of my body. As we were going to the airport, I couldn't even lift my suitcase, couldn't help my wife with our son. And then when I was on the flight, I got up to use the restroom and I collapsed in the aisle. And my brothers were on the flight because we were all heading out to Salt Lake, and they helped me up. And my grandfather picked us up. He saw me, and my left side of my face was drooping a little bit. And he said, "I think you've had a stroke." And I said, "I don't think that's right. I have no chest pain. I didn't pass out." Anyway, rushed me to the hospital. I undergo an MRI. Doctor comes out and he says, "You have a massive growth on the right side of your motor strip." And, I'm 25 years old. I'm like, "Does that mean a brain tumor?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Am I going to die?" And he said, "Yeah, you might." And I said to him, I have a son. I can't, that's not on the cards for me. I have a son. It's a year and I can't die. So miracle surgery. They told me I'd never walk again. That was also not an option. Went through that physical therapy, 3.5 months in the hospital, physical therapy. I came out the other side and was grateful for all of it. The reason I tell you the story is it actually ended my marriage. And I know Lance Armstrong is not a popular name to bring up, but I read Lance's book. It's Not About the Bike when I was in the hospital. This was before his downfall. And he described it perfectly, where after he came out of his surgery and came out of, I had no chemo, but radiation, and you go through the whole process. He said, "I looked at my wife one day and she was exhausted. And I can remember when they finally discharged me and I was done with radiation and they said, you're going to live, we got to bring you in for checkups, all that, but you're good. I remember I looked at my wife and I said, she's gassed. She's exhausted. We had a cross country move. And sure enough, 2 months later, we were divorced. So within a 6-month period, I went from a happy, gainfully employed husband, father, to suddenly a single father living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Salt Lake City, not knowing what's next, because I moved out here so I could be close to my son. And so that's when I learned that if I had enough whiskey, my thoughts turned off.
Wow. Hey, you know what? I want to take a break right at this point because I think it's a turning point. Your story about your cancer, I had no idea you had cancer, and it was that serious. When I've never been that sick, but I remember being on a flight in 2016 and having trouble breathing, and turns out I had submassive blood clots in my lungs. And so as you begin to tell your story, I was having this flashback, and the fact that you are here, the fact that I am here, is a testimony to the fact that the miraculous still does happen.
Yes.
And so I want to take a break right here, because you said it was at that point you begin to understand or think that if you had enough whiskey, life would be good. And when we come back, we're going to pick it up from there and begin to talk about that journey, because you experienced loss. Mm-hmm. I mean, you experienced adversity, but you then experienced loss. Yeah. And coping with loss is something that we need to talk about. And we'll do that right when we come back here with my fantastic guest, Spencer Checketts, on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast.
We hope you're enjoying Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Paralysis to Purpose for more updates. Also, check out David's website at davidcookspeaks.com to learn more about his mission and purchase his book, Getting Undressed, From Paralysis to Purpose.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast, with my guest, Spencer Checketts. And Spencer, you had just shared about your surviving a brain tumor and ended up getting divorced. And now you're 25, single, by yourself, and you turned to whiskey.
Yeah.
And what happened after that? What did that lead to?
Well, as we kind of started out the conversation with, we talked about faith, and I had walked away from the faith that I knew as a child because of my disagreements with the historical approach of the LDS faith. I think there's plenty of good things about it. I think, like most organized religions, there's some good, there's some bad. Mm-hmm. So suddenly I was in a situation where I needed to heal, and I didn't know how. I was alone. I'd walked away from the faith that I knew. I wasn't grounded in any spirituality. And so the easiest way to turn your mind off and get your thoughts just quiet and escape from your own mind. And I have different tools now, and I've read and studied a lot on, and I meditate, I'm into yoga, all those things now, but I didn't have it then. And it's amazing how your mind will go quiet after 3 or 4 really stiff cocktails. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's a habit that I developed that really lasted up until it was about a 15-year battle to kind of get a hold of it and understand more about it. And it led to some legal issues. It led to some relationship issues. I've been fortunate that it never led to any health issues, and I was never into any hard drugs. I pretty much stuck with the booze and the weed. Those were the 2 things for me. And it allowed escape, and it allowed me to forget that suddenly I had gone from reading to my son every night to seeing him once a week, and, wondering what was next in my career, and losing a woman who I loved very much, and having family be disappointed in what had happened. And, so that's really where it started as a result of suffering some tremendous trauma. And I know how to heal trauma now, but I didn't then. It was just the easiest and quickest way to get your mind to shut off. And so that's what I started to do. And it became a pretty consistent daily thing for a number of years.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned the word loss a couple of times.
Yeah.
You lost your wife.
Mm-hmm.
You lost your ability to see your son on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
and now you know how to handle loss.
Yes.
Because I'm convinced that from the time we're born until we transition off the earth, we're losing something.
Uh-huh.
We have to learn how to deal with that.
Yeah.
When did you come to grips with, you said it took you 15 years, and then the light bulb came on.
Yeah.
What happened in the 15th year that made it different for you than the previous 14 years?
Well, and we could do this for hours on hours, Coach, because during that 15-year period, I would have a year of sobriety there, or 6 months, whatever it was, right? You mentioned life is not linear. Life is not a straight line, and neither is a path to sobriety or enlightenment or understanding or whatever you want to call it. I think part of it was a maturation period. The other part of it is, you mentioned my DUI in November of 2018. That came at a hefty price. I had actually just had another relationship end. I was engaged to be married. That ended. I had and luckily I've been able to rebound, and I have a great situation here with a really good afternoon drive time show that I'm very proud of. But at the time, I had the #1 afternoon sports talk show here with a guy named Gordon Monson, who's a columnist in Salt Lake City. And I got that job at 31. Ironically enough, throughout my bout of dealing with this addiction, I was able to achieve in my field. And my DUI in 2018 cost me that job. It cost me the respect of a lot of my peers. It came at tremendous financial difficulty. I want to be very clear. Driving drunk is a horrible mistake. You put people in danger. You put your own life in danger. Grateful that I didn't have an accident, didn't hurt anyone, didn't hurt myself. But the way that, and Greg Popovich talked about this on Steve Kerr's podcast when they were talking about how we can change police legislation and race relations. And the example he used is a DUI in 1985 was akin to a reckless driving ticket.
Right.
And now, Coach, what happens to you is you lose your job. It's at least a $10,000 to $15,000 commitment. There are mandatory minimums where you do go to jail, and I did spend a few days in jail. And my mugshot was on the front page of the Salt Lake Tribune. I'll never forget sitting down to watch the evening news, turning it on, and I was the lead story. 1280 The Zone afternoon drive host, Jazz pre-app and post-game host Spences Checketts arrested for DUI. And the enormity of what I sacrificed for one moment of a really selfish decision to get behind it. And look, it wasn't like, I was just at my buddies watching a game, and I just needed to get home, and I probably had too many pops and got pulled over on the freeway, but after that, I entered inpatient rehabilitation at a place called Cirque Lodge here in Utah. I did 65 days, flushed everything out of my system. And when I got out, I felt amazing physically. I learned some skills in there, namely meditation, trauma healing, got into some things where I know now that if a thought or a feeling overwhelms me with negativity or depression or anxiety or whatever it is, I know how to release that. I don't reach instantly for a drink or smoke some weed or whatever. I don't do that because I have the skills now. I didn't then, but I remember how good I felt. And then when you take a step back from a macro view and realize everything that you just sacrificed that I had worked really hard for to build up, having a respectable career here, being the #1 radio host in a decent sized market. We're not New York or LA, but we're a top 28 market, it's a good life that I had built. And in one moment I gave it all up. And I can remember I turned 40 in rehab. I had birthday plans with family and friends, and I couldn't do it. I turned 40 in inpatient rehabilitation. I just said, if you don't get a grip on this, the next downfall is going to be a lot worse than losing a job or a relationship or the respect of people. And I just realized I had to find another way. And thankfully I have, and I'm in a really good place. It'll be 5 years later coming up. So
that's fantastic. And so you said you got the tools you needed. And so often people don't understand that you need help.
Yeah.
And it's okay to ask for help. What would you say is the most, when was your darkest day over that 15-year stretch? What was your darkest moment?
I would say the darkest, I'll take you back to 2003, which I still think is very telling. The darkest day is realizing it's hard to explain what it's like to be 25 years old. And in a few short months, you have a home that you love and a wife that you love and a kid that you love and a job that you love. And then it's like somebody hits a button and then you're sitting in a small apartment in downtown Salt Lake City with none of those things. No home, no wife, no son, no job. And I can remember this moment where in front of me on my coffee table was a stack of hospital bills and a bottle of Jack Daniels. Wow. Those were the two things on my table. And I remember I just reached for the bottle without really even thinking about it. And next thing I knew, I was laying on the ground. I just drank myself into oblivion. And when I think back on that, that is clearly where I launched myself onto this 15-year journey. There are other moments. I can remember the first time I heard a jail cell close behind me and I went, oh my God. I can remember the morning of my birthday when I woke up in rehab and realizing I was turning 40 in rehab. That was a weird thing. I remember the phone call from my employer when he said, we can't bring you back. I remember the phone call from the Salt Lake Tribune that said, we have your mugshot. Do you have anything to say? The moment when I turned on the television and my mugshot's on TV and suddenly my phone's blown up, I had to turn that off. Like, there are a lot of really low moments, but ultimately that's the power of trauma healing is you can deal with those, process them, let them go through you and then release them. That's the beautiful thing.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because that is what people need to know is how can you transform your mind and transform your soul to go another direction, still fight the battle, because none of us get to that perfect place, but we're able to manage that. What would you say are the three most important tools that you could think of that people would need to know when dealing with this type of trauma or trauma in general?
Okay, number one, and if I could scream this to the world, I would. So I'll use your podcast to scream it to the world. Your mind lies to you. Your mind lies to you. Do not believe that the thoughts that creep into your mind are a real representation of who you are, where you're at, or the reality of anything, because we're all conditioned in a different way, whether it's societally or with religious beliefs or past trauma. So when your mind starts chirping like you're not good enough or you idiot, you did this, those are the voices that are lies. Okay. And so the skill that I've been able to develop through training and practice is observing my thoughts and not getting lost in them. Okay. So when you have the power to observe your thoughts and the negative ones come in, like that's not true, okay. And so the teaching is relax and release. Okay. So relax your shoulders, relax your heart, and release these negative thoughts. And then when happier thoughts come in, ultimately, that's not necessarily the truth either, but you can focus on them and they make you feel a little bit better, right? But those are going to pass through you as well. Where you want to get to is a place of just strict observation. And then when you have to think, you have the space and the energy to think. It makes me better at my job. It makes me a better husband, a better father, a better friend, as opposed to getting lost in, and I still battle it all the time. Every day I still have these thoughts creep in like, you're not good enough, you fraud, like nepotism, everything that everyone has always said about you is true. You're only here because of your dad, whatever it is. Wow. Instead of following those thoughts down this rabbit hole where the only solution is to quiet them through negative habits, I just have the ability to stay centered in my thoughts, let them pass through me. And that's how you are able to heal past trauma. Because once you release them and you practice it, the thoughts, your mind kind of quiets and they don't come as consistently.
Wow.
But if you mask them, coach, they're always there. And then they manifest in uglier ways, like body pain. I'm convinced that one of the reasons I had a brain tumor is that I wasn't able to release a lot of the negative energy that I had building up inside of me.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Your mind lies to you. That's number one.
And the mind is the battlefield.
Right.
If we understand that, and from a faith perspective, we talk about bringing thoughts under subjection. So you have to manage your mind.
Right.
You have to manage those thoughts. And like you said, that's a lot of work. That's, that's training and practicing over and over again.
Learning how to shoot a jumper, coach. It's the same thing. It's repetition.
It's repetition. So, all right. So you said get your mind right. That's the first one. What's your second one?
So the magic of the breath. Okay. The magic of staying connected to the breath. So if you can stay connected to your breath, it takes you out of your mind. And so part of meditation is focusing on your breath. And there's a method called the Wim Hof method that I do. There's a 4-7-8 method that I do. It instantly takes you out of your mind and centers you and releases any of the negative emotions, anxiety, depression, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So I have 3 or 4 different breath exercises that I do that center me in the moment, because depression lies in the past, anxiety lies in the future. There's really only love in the moment if you can get there.
Oh, hold on. So you said that really quick.
Yeah.
And I want you to slow down and say that one more time about what's in the past and what's in the future and what only is now, because I think that right there is a huge key.
So depression is in the past, anxiety lies in the future, and there's only love in the moment. There really is. And it's all we have anyway. You know, if you think about it, we only have this moment. The stories we tell ourselves about the past, they're not even true. You know, and ultimately you think like, oh, I can't believe I said this to this person 25 years ago. He must hate me. He doesn't think about you. Right. That's your ego. You know what I mean? Like, yes, that's your problem.
Yes,
oh, no, what if I don't have enough money to retire? Well, that's in 20, 25 years or whatever. Like, what are you doing? If you think about that, you definitely won't, because you're ignoring what's right in front of you. And the way that I center myself in the moment is breath work, you know? And so that's another skill that I was able to learn through my rehab, my yoga, my meditation, and it's able to really ground me where I need to be in the moment.
So you said manage your mind, get your mind right. Yeah. And then the next thing is living in the moment, and also the proper learning how to breathe properly and what that means, and as part of your ritual, because you've gone down the road of meditation and mindfulness, which people hear the word meditation and they think it's got to be like, I don't know, like spooky or something.
It's not,
but it doesn't have to go that way. Meditation is something that has been here since the beginning of time. And it's just taking a different, it's coming to the forefront now more than before. Yeah. So what's the third thing? What's the third tool?
Being grounded in some sort of spirituality. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. I believe that. But that was something that was a process for me to relearn what spirituality meant in a different way, because I would be triggered if I ever tried to reconnect to what my faith as a child was, because I just don't agree with the fundamental principles as we talked about. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other ways to be connected to a higher power. You can call it God, you can call it the universe, call it I don't care what you call it, but you better acknowledge it, because there is something out there that's greater than ourselves.
You're just saying it's important for you to understand that the battle is in your mind, and you need to learn how to release things, live in the now, live in the now. That eliminates a whole lot of stress and pressure and sickness, quite honestly. And then thirdly, you're a spiritual being. And so as a result, you must connect spiritually to something in order for you to maximize the person you are. Those are great tips. And regardless of your trauma, I mean, yours was addiction to substance. It can be something else, things that are causing you stress, depression, worry. Begin to practice this. Obviously, you've been practicing this a while. What's your typical day like? Like, how many do you stop and meditate? Hourly? What do you do?
So the first thing I do when I get up, and this comes from Naval Ravikant, who is kind of a new age, he's a very successful businessman, entrepreneur. Depending on how much time I have, I just sit in silence and surrender to whatever comes. Okay. And that sounds daunting to people, because the first few times you do it, you're going to start to get familiar with all these voices in your head, and you're going to be a little freaked out the first time you realize that there are voices that are talking to you. But the more practice you get, like now I can do it for an hour, and I'll sit there, lay there, and just surrender to whatever comes. I try to get to a hot yoga class in the morning. I do a yoga class. It's called Hot Power Fusion. It's like a sweat shop. It's like 120 degrees when we're just stretching. It's great for my body. I had tremendous back pain as a result of the imbalances that I had with my brain tumor for a number of years. Been able to heal that. And then it's just a lot of reading and a lot of prep. You know, when I first got into radio, I asked my dad, I said, who should I talk to about this? He said, call Mike, meaning Mike Breen. He said, call Mike Breen, tell him you're going to get into radio and ask for his advice. And Mike said, for every hour you're on air, you need to do 1 hour of prep. Mm-hmm. And so I'm on air for 4 hours every day. Now, part of that prep, like last night, I watched Golden State Boston. Mm-hmm. That's prep for me.
Right.
But after you and I get off today, I got my stretching this morning. I did my meditation. For the next 3 hours, I'll be reading all the local stuff, reading all the national stuff. I'll watch some of the First Take, Get Up debate shows to see what people are talking about. And then I'll hop on air at 2 and I'm off at 6. And this weekend, I'm heading up to Park City to get some golf in. So that's what today is. And that's kind of a normal day.
You are living the life, boy. You are.
I am. It's a good life. And I'm married now.
Yes, I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you. I remember seeing something in social media when you got engaged or something like that. And let's talk about, look, because we talked about the loss.
Yeah.
And we're not comparing anything, but
sure.
you are now married and happily so. What is the significance of being married, and what role does and did your wife play in you helping to manage this and helping you to stay sober?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I have this. Let me see if you can see it. I keep this in my office, and I keep this on my desk.
Yep.
You know, and it was given to me when I was in therapy, when I was in inpatient rehabilitation.
I'm going to read that. You know what? Because for those who don't see this, we'll tell them what it says. It says, I'll let you read it. The comeback is
always stronger than the setback.
The comeback is always stronger than the setback.
Right. Because it's easy if you're in the midst of the fight, if you're buried in the mire of a massive mistake. And look, for me, I think it's a good example for people where I've had an example of life knocking me down and then my own mistakes knocking me down, because there's a little bit of both. But when you're in the midst of the fight, it's easy to get lost in the pain. And then you don't think there's some sort of a comeback, but there really is. But it's up to you, you know, and staying connected to a higher power, as I mentioned, God, universe, whatever it is. But I met Britta, my wife, at a perfect time because I was sober. I was thinking clearly. And I had honestly, you know, with having my marriage end and then having the other relationship end where I was engaged, I came to a point where at the age of 41, I didn't think that I was the guy that was going to have a successful relationship. I just came to an acceptance where it's probably not for me. Tried a number of times. And suddenly there she was. You know, I wasn't looking for it. And she, you know, she came into my life at a perfect time. And we have just worked very hard. We've been together for 4 years now. We're very much a 4 agreements couple, the Don Miguel Ruiz book, you know, where don't take anything personally, always do your best, be impeccable with your word and don't make assumptions. Like that's how we communicate. And it works for us. And she's just a delight. She is kind. She is empathetic. She's hardworking. She's German. She's from her father, first generation German. So we're soccer fans, and we have a ton of fun together. We travel together. We eat together. We do yoga together. We're very much. She's my best friend, and we have this little puppy, this little English cream puppy, and we have a house up in Federal Heights, which is where I lived when I was a kid in Salt Lake City, and it's 8 minutes from my studio. And she's great. I mean, she is a life enhancer, no doubt. It's been a great blessing.
How about that, audience? I mean, that is great to hear that and to know that you're never the mistake you make.
Right.
You're never that, and you can still have a high level of quality in your life in spite of some of the choices we make.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We talk about 3 things on the podcast, and we talk about the importance of perspective, perseverance, and partnerships. And I believe that everyone has to have those components on their journey from paralysis to purpose. Mm-hmm. I want to do with you, as I do with all of our guests, give you the opportunity to tell me what you think of when you hear the word perspective. We'll start there. And what did that mean for you on your journey?
Perspective. You know, I think and you'll get a kick out of this, I'm going to say as I get a little bit older, I often wonder if folks understand how important it is to be authentic and genuine. And, the old saying, above all else, do not lie to oneself. Don't lie to yourself, right? And as you approach life with more authenticity and more honesty, like you referenced, my marriage and my relationship, one of the things that has allowed us to be as strong as we are is I don't lie to her about anything, not anything. And I don't lie to myself about anything. And part of that was being honest and vulnerable about my past and trusting that she would accept it, which she has and done. But when I think of perspective, I think you used a great line earlier where life is not linear, and understanding that even though things are really good right now, there's probably going to be a storm coming soon. And so everything that I've been able to learn about utilizing the tools that I have to stay present, these are things that you have to utilize when the sun is shining and when the storm is coming too. And you can stay grounded and focused, and you can stay very, very present, and nothing can interfere with your energy, good or bad.
Right.
Because, if I start to get in the mindset of, well, look at what I've done, and I came back, and now I've got this radio show, and I signed a new no, that's my ego, right? And if I get lost in that voice, thinking that I'm the man or whatever, it's funny, my wife's not a sports fan, so I'll come home after doing like a great interview with a coach or a player. I'll be like, babe, I had Quinn Snyder on today. And she's like, oh, that's nice. That's cute. Like, and that it keeps me grounded, because she doesn't care if I had Patrick Ewing on last year, and we did a good 15 minutes with Patrick. And I came home, I'm like, no one else in the country interviewed Patrick Ewing today. And she's like, and who's Patrick Ewing?
I love it.
He doesn't know,
Yeah.
And so it's a balance to stay in you mentioned Buddhism, they call it the Tao, the center, the way, instead of, your ego or believing you are your worst moment. Perspective to me means staying centered as much as possible.
Wow. It's interesting. You reminded me of a story when I was coaching at Duke with Coach Cave in the early 90s. And I remember talking to him about basketball, and I was a younger guy and still loved the game, was really into it. And he said, let me just help you. And I said, what do you mean? There are people who live in Durham, North Carolina, that don't even know we have a basketball team.
Mm-hmm.
And I never thought that no one in the world would not be interested in Duke basketball.
Right. Yeah.
And there are people who live in the city where the university exists that don't know the team, never been to a game, and don't even know they have a basketball program.
Yep.
And so that perspective, like you said, it brings you back to a place of being centered.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Where you don't have these extremes. What about perseverance?
I think my perseverance comes from the way I was raised, not just with my father, but also both my grandfathers, who were very good, kind, decent men, but also had a pragmatism to them, where they used to say to me, Spencer, you're smart, you're charismatic, you're intelligent. We expect you to achieve. We expect you to do well. And, my last grandfather passed about 2 months ago. And at his funeral, I can remember his sister coming up to me and saying how proud he would have been, and how proud he was. He wasn't well for the final few years of his life, but the fact that I was able to pull myself up and just keep going, and that's what he always said, no matter what, we show up. That's what we do. As a family, we show up. And it doesn't matter, some days you're going to be tired, some days you're not going to feel well, but you still show up. That's what we do. And it was just kind of embedded in me by my father and mother and their fathers and mothers. It's just kind of a Checketts hereditary trait. Like you
just show up.
You know what I mean? Yeah, you might not. Maybe one day where you have to show up, you think people don't want you to be there. You still show up. Mm-hmm. One day you don't feel like getting jumpers up, you still get jumpers up. Whatever it is, you show up and you do it, and that's
and you never quit. I mean, the thing that's impressive about you is where you are on your journey, and where you've been, and one of the constants in all of that is that you keep moving,
right?
Keep moving forward. So the last thing is partnerships. I am grateful for my own life and all the things I've had to deal with, that I've had I haven't had to deal with this journey and these challenges by myself.
Yeah.
When you hear partnerships, what comes to mind for you?
So, I mean, so many things. My high school coaches, we were talking about Don Usher, the legendary New Canaan coach who passed away. I played for 5 or 6 coaches that I still love and admire and respect, and you're one of them. And, you know, when you're a 14, 15-year-old boy, you need people to believe in you. And my coaches did, you know, and teammates, being a part of a locker room, even in radio and media, having good radio partners, producers. My wife, I have a great circle of friends, great community out here. You know, there's this saying, I believe it was also a Buddhist saying that I saw where the Buddha was asked, how do we treat others? And his response was, there are no others. We're all connected. There's no separation. You know what I mean? Like all of us are brothers and sisters, and we're all in this together. And I believe that it's about relationships. And that's one of the great things that sports taught me as a kid, watching those great Knicks teams of the 90s come together, and the toughness and grit, and great coaches and players and front office executives and media members, and the characters involved and the cast involved. And, you know, I'm very much an Alan Watts guy. He believes we're all in this grand play together, and nobody in a play suffers. So you might as well enjoy it. The very purpose of life is just to live it. And yeah, I you know, whenever I have a chance to connect with someone these days, a lot of times it's on the golf course, or every afternoon for 4 hours, I'm interviewing people. You know, it's a reminder of what we do to others, we're doing to ourselves, because there are no others. We're all intertwined and connected.
Wow. So, man, you know what? I'm going to let that marinate, because I was getting ready to go into the whole concept of self-care and self-help as it reflects out on other people and that kind of stuff. But I'm not going to go there. Now, listen, what's next for you? What's on the docket?
I'm going to go prep for my show, and I'm going to do my show today. I don't get further ahead. I think one of the mistakes I made as a younger person, and I think a lot of this was because of my father achieving so much as a young person. I remember I got the best possible job in my industry in this city at the age of 30. And I remember thinking, well, that must mean Seattle's going to call in 4 years, and then LA is going to call in 4 years, and then it's New York, and I'll end up back where I grew up, and I'll be the next Mike and the Mad Dog on WFAN. And like, that was the way my mind was thinking. And the problem with that is I was always chasing it. So if a call didn't come, I go, wait a second, back to the ego. I'm the guy here. You should be calling me. I can do this in Seattle, whatever. Yeah. So now what's next is whatever is in the next moment. And I have no idea, you know, where this path is going to go, because I don't feel like I'm in control of it anyway.
I get it. I often am the same way. I don't look past what I have to do right now.
Yep.
And then I get that done, and let's see what's next. And to me, it's easier to have small bites of food than trying to eat the whole pie at one time.
100%. I just say to myself, do the next right thing. That's it.
Yeah. Do the next right thing. So, and if you make a commitment to doing the next right thing, you may not get it right all the time, but I tell you what, 90% of the time you get it right, because you're committed to doing the next right thing, which is right there in front of you. And I think as you mentioned, sometimes we look beyond what's in front of us, and then we miss or mess up that opportunity. Right. And that leads to other things. So if people wanted to follow you and get a hold of you, what's the best way to follow Spencer Checketts?
Well, I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and it's just my name, which is Spence Checketts. And Checketts is Checketts. I have a podcast that I do occasionally called Reality Check with Spence Checketts, where it's very much like this, open conversations, but every day it's called The Drive with Spence Checketts on ESPN 700. And they're both in podcast form. So if you just search it on Apple, Google, wherever you get shows, you know the deal. Like, we're up on all the platforms, free and available.
Let me just thank you for being here today. I still call you Spencer, even though you're Spence.
All good. No, all good.
Your story is remarkable. Your journey is to this point has been great, and I'm sure the best days are ahead of you, and you're going to continue to impact many lives. So again, thank you for being here. And this is David Cooks reminding you, until next time on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast, that your ability to endure is always greater than your willingness to endure.
You can do anything you put your mind to.
Thanks for tuning in to Paralysis to Purpose. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Paralysis to Purpose on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. To purchase his book, visit davidcookspeaks.com. Be sure to tune in next time for more inspiring conversations with David Cooks.
I'm very proud of the work that we do and the movement that we've built for upcycled food. Over the last 3 years, we started with a group of 9 companies in the Upcycled Food Association to sort of grow consumer awareness of upcycled food. And we've grown to over 225 members, including some of the largest food companies in the world, like Mondelez, Barry Callebaut, Kroger, Del Monte, people who really have sway over the global food system.
Next time on Paralysis to Purpose.
She says, I eat adventure for breakfast, and I'm not afraid of taking the road less traveled.
And we've, raised awareness of this and gotten them on board to create some of their own upcycled products that when you purchase upcycled food, you're helping fight food waste, which is helping fight climate change. So that work really means a lot to me.
Paralysis to purpose.